Hi, hello. I have a confession. I talk a decent amount on this channel how I am not super drawn to dystopias, that they stress me out. I was late to the game for the Hunger Games and didn't read it till I was in college, and I don't just gravitate toward dystopia still in my fiction. However, there was a time when I loved at least one dystopia, and I am of course talking about the ancestor in whatever way, the grandmother, the grandfather of the dystopias we saw in the 2010s. Uglies by Scott Westerfeld, or the Uglies series. Now, of course, this is not the original cover. I could not find the original cover, and I loved those covers. Now, as many of you know, or may know, or now know, there is a Netflix adaptation of the Uglies series coming to Netflix this month. And so I want to revisit this series, revisit the show, or visit the show for the first time, and it will also help me because I read the first in the follow-up, either duology or trilogy, I don't remember which, that Westerfeld came out with more than a couple years ago, probably at this point, that is like loosely tangential to the Ugly series. However, I spent the first book waiting for a cameo from Tally Youngblood, and I did not see her. However, I remembered that I didn't really remember enough beyond the kind of conception of the first series or the books to know if I was seeing her, so I need to revisit. And this book and this series was ahead of its time in a lot of ways, I think, in how it conceptualized our future. This and Feed by M.T. Anderson in particular, because this, or the concept of this book, is the idea that when you turn 16, you get all of these plastic surgeries to turn you into a pretty, and just how you cannot have your original face or you are an ugly, and the revolution around not opting into those surgeries and what those surgeries mean. And at the time, our kind of culture and conception around plastic surgery was vastly different in the sense that it was still like gossip in tabloids that was snickered at if especially women and the sexism around that had plastic surgery, as well as if we think about the way filters have infiltrated a lot of things. I am an adult, I am a millennial, I have seen the kind of editing that went on in magazines. I am aware of filters on pictures, I know of their existence, and I still find myself sometimes comparing myself to this image I know isn't real online. And so I can only imagine what that is like for teens today in terms of like coming up in your development amidst all of that. Because even back in the day, like magazines felt kind of aspirational, even if we knew what editing was going on. And so to be able to have filters on everyday people, it's just a whole other conversation, which is why I think this book is so perfectly positioned to be in conversation with our modern moment. However, I also haven't reread it in a while, but don't worry, we're going to be doing that soon too. However, I have not yet watched the trailer, so that's what we're going to do today. That's what you saw on the thumbnail, surely. Before we get too much further into this, hi, my name is Melody. I talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel. I talk a lot about book-to-screen adaptations, so if any of that interests you, go ahead and subscribe and hang out some more. Like if you feel so inclined, whatever moves you in this moment, but welcome, and I'm glad to have you here. Now, I will say, when looking at the thumbnail of this trailer or the screenshots I've seen kind of floating around, I have been kind of hesitant because I feel like there is such a visual language, or the visual language is such an important part of this. And it comes down to what we think of the visual language of dystopias being, particularly in how that has been envisioned in the Hunger Games and the Divergent series, which I never finished on or kind of completed the movies, but that is what it is. Now, the Hunger Games has this really great kind of contrast, right? Because that's the whole conversation in that series. And I think that this series has a really interesting and unique opportunity as well. And it's hard for me because growing up with these books in the early 2000s, now when were these published? Let me see. Okay, so the original copyright is 2005, so this fits. So it is a very different mental image and kind of visual that it paints for me in terms of the kind of lavishness and the excess. A kind of Gossip Girl kind of filtered through like millennium, like the bubbles and the bright colors, just all of that turn of the century kind of aesthetic is still so rooted in my mental images of this book and what we thought, or what I visualized as the pretties when I was reading this book, which was very much this kind of heightened, beautiful, larger than life, rich kind of thing. But I think that color was a large part of that as well. And so when I'm thinking of the contrast there is very much a contrast. And so similar to the Hunger Games in that, but I'm visualizing that much differently in the Uglies series. And I'm seeing a lot of really muted colors in the images I'm seeing of this. Now, granted, these could be images from the forest, and when you read the first line of the series, it says, "The early summer sky was the color of cat vomit," which is such a great opening line, especially for a young adult series. It's kind of evocative in a really kind of twisted and interesting, engaging way. And it's kind of a specific color that's maybe not the bright colors that I had mentally associated with New Pretty Town. And again, we're not going to be in New Pretty Town, spoiler alert, for the entirety of the narrative. Additionally, I'm very excited. I have a lot of mental images kind of tied to Tally and her hoverboard. And so, yeah, I'm just very interested to see what this is going to be. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to see what the visual language is. We're going to see what it seems to be invoking. And then later, in another video, we can speak more in depth about the book. And then, of course, circle back for the book in conversation with whatever this ends up being on Netflix. All right, so let's go ahead and watch this. Okay, very muted. I wanted to start with the hoverboard, I'm not gonna lie. I think that would have been great. Joey King, of course, a great actress. I think older than I was visioning or envisioning for this, but I like that shot.
I wanted to be pretty. I thought it would change everything.
Ooh, I like the shot of the windows.
I hope that's still true.
Yeah, it's darker than I anticipated or envisioned.
For this moment. All the flaws you have today will be gone tomorrow. With one elegant procedure.
Oh, I like the glitter. I love a good confetti cannon.
Because everyone
Okay, those colors are more like what I was envisioning.
Will you promise me something? No matter how pretty they make you, just don't let them erase you.
Promise.
You get the surgery, they tell you what to do, and that's it. Paris?
What are you doing here?
I was worried.
Things are just different here. You'll get it when you're pretty.
All right, because she wasn't in New Pretty Town yet. Okay. I revoke some of those assessments.
What if I told you that there's an alternative?
Show the hoverboard.
This place.
Welcome to the smoke.
The smoke.
They have a different way of doing things.
And we will do whatever it takes to protect that.
If you want to learn how to fly, you gotta learn how to fall.
There's the hoverboard. Oh, was it David's hoverboard? Listen, I will...
These people want to end us.
The smoke has decided their way of living is more worthy than ours.
I was told these lies my whole life. It's time for you to make a choice.
All my life, I wanted to be
Okay,
pretty.
that visual of the smoke lives. That's good. That's
I
good.
thought it would change everything.
Okay, I was clearly talking through that more than I usually do, and I missed what song is playing. Does it tell us? Maybe not. I don't see it, but I can't figure out if it is a song from the 2000s or not. Anyway, okay, so this has elements of things I expected to see or envisioned in this, and elements that feel a little different. It definitely feels in conversation visually with its predecessors in terms of dystopian adaptations, which is really interesting because this really was the vanguard of young adult dystopias, not taking anything away from the Hunger Games, obviously, because that is a masterpiece in and of itself. But yeah, okay, so New Pretty Town, the fireworks, the glitz, the glamour, that is what I envision, right? Like the after. I love seeing that confetti. I love those visuals, and I'm very interested to see if we'll see more of that. And we might not get as much of that as I remembered or thought, because again, the first book is Uglies, the second book is Pretties. So we might explore that more in the second. Now, Joey King I really like her. She is a little older than I envisioned for Tally. Maybe I have just kind of associated that cover model from the original books so specifically with it too. But I think it's interesting because the trailer, I think, speaks to a lot of things that book readers would be interested in, like that visual of The Smoke Lives, which I got oddly emotional about. And I think it may just be this idea of a book series that I loved so dearly when I was a young adult, and seeing that finally translated. At the same time, I feel like a lot of these visuals do come across a little kind of generic in terms of people that may not be as familiar with the book series, and it feeling like another dystopia, which I think is fitting a bill. But like I said, I think that this has such a unique perspective and such interesting things to say, especially about how we kind of curate ourselves. And it has the potential to speak to the modern moment as much, if not more, than the original moment in a lot of ways. And so I'm not sure, again, kind of the bridge there. I think it is trying to be in conversation with these works that have come before it now for the larger audiences and the wider general audiences, while still kind of maintaining its own identity. But I would like to see that identity pushed a little bit. It's also hard because this was written in 2005. I grew up in the 2000s. I am firmly a millennial, but that is to say I have seen a lot of disappointing adaptations of books I love. And I don't think that that is a uniquely millennial experience by any means. It's just what I've seen a lot of. And so I'm kind of coming at this in wake of the Artemis Fowl movies, which was a series that I treasured so much in childhood and early adulthood. And the movies just kind of fundamentally, not just kind of, fundamentally misunderstood the appeal and the draw of that world. And if you want to hear me rant about that in a much earlier form, I have a whole video about that. But here, again, I want it to have something really specific to say. And I think there is something really specific to say. And so it looks gorgeous, but I don't really have a sense of what we're going to before and after. And maybe it's just the kind of dystopia visuals are dystopia in this kind of first look. And I want it to feel more like it is an outgrowth of the current moment, if that makes sense. And of course, it's not for me to say. And again, Tally is not a pretty yet. So we may need to draw a really stark difference between those two worlds. And we're only seeing the kind of outside glimpses of the pretty world in relation to Tally. But I think it's also really interesting the way the kind of visuals and the conversation around that transformation are being set up here. And it's just very interesting because I've had these kind of mental images associated with this series for decades at this point. And so seeing that kind of realized and visualized is going to be very interesting. However, I am still very excited about this project. I'm by no means saying, oh, this looks like it's going to be bad. It's just interesting and a little odd to kind of see it through this lens in a lot of ways. But I know Scott Westerfeld has posted about the series. In fact, that's how I found out that this was actually happening. Like, I knew it had been optioned a long time ago, but I'd lost track of it and haven't seen a whole lot of buzz around it, which is kind of concerning to me in some ways, in wake or in light of the My Lady Jane rollout, in which it felt like I had heard nothing about it, and I heard a decent amount about it right before release, and then it was canceled almost immediately despite overwhelmingly positive reception and not giving it time to grow its audience. But that is a whole other conversation. So this is going to be really interesting to see how this vision exists on screen and how it realizes these stories that have lived in the public consciousness or in the consciousness of a generation for a long time, and those mental images become a little bit solidified in some ways. And so kind of putting visuals, concrete visuals to it is going to be an endeavor because, yeah, there's just a lot to realize with this. And this is kind of a quintessential early 2000s, mid 2000s series that has a very special place in my heart, even down to kind of snarking on a book for the first time that I can remember in terms of extras, because I remember saying, yes, this book is extra. It was unnecessary, but that's a whole other conversation. And I frankly don't remember enough about extras to read it in that way. But even so, Scott Westerfeld was really central to my young adult reading life, even beyond these books, in a way that feels harder to articulate now, but kind of guided me through even college. I remember he came out with a new book. What was his book that was released right after college? It was Afterworlds. I remember like tweeting about it, probably maybe posting on Facebook about how I was excited that a new Scott Westerfeld book was out, but I was gonna have to wait to get my hands on a copy. And one of my best friends from childhood, like way back to kindergarten, Sean, texted me and he was like, "What is your email?" And I thought nothing of it, gave it to him, and all of a sudden a Kindle copy of that book dropped in my inbox, and that's friendship. So needless to say, there is a lot, or I feel like a lot of expectations for this project. I'm excited, I'm a little hesitant, I'm not quite sure what to expect. I want this to have its own iconic feel and visual language because it lingers and looms so largely in my own reading life and kind of is one of the books that helped shape me in early adulthood. And so I'm very interested to see how this translates to the screen and if it kind of retains its individuality, which is kind of ironic when you think about the plot of the book, right? Which again, we'll get into more. I'm just interested to see how this is going to translate to larger audiences, because right now I don't think it looks bad by any means. I'm still very excited about it, but it feels like it might be reading just a little bit more generic than the books seem to be. And it may just be that they were so original when they dropped, and I don't think there's still these aspects. I love the moment of seeing like the boxes. There's some really beautiful shots here of seeing Tally kind of assessing her cheekbones and what this idea of beauty is. And even past, I'll be interested to see if they explored this in the movie visually, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more too, but the idea that it's like beauty, but also this kind of like heightened individuality in the ways that beauty presents itself and like the colors, and I think you could get like things embedded in you. There was a whole range of possibilities, which still really aligns in a lot of ways with how we've progressed as a society since this dropped. So I'm very interested, I think, kind of in the uniformity of like the dystopian uniform visual language that is kind of at play here, instead of just feeling more kind of muted. But again, I haven't read the book for so long that is probably part of it, and I'm just forgetting, and I will kick myself in the next couple of days when I revisit the text. But I'm gonna stop babbling here about the same kind of things. I'm very interested to get to know these characters again more deeply. Here we're kind of setting up visually and with the cut of this, the kind of larger systems at play and the way that Tally is a piece of the system, and then of course the resistance that the smoke represents. And I just love, I have so many fond memories of the smoke and just what that was, and I'm sure it is more grandiose in my reading memory than it may exist in the book. But again, just seeing that the smoke lives made me really emotional for some reason, and I loved the way that that was realized. And so if that visual language is kind of translating, I will be really interested to see that. We got to see at least one hoverboard, so that is a win. And yeah, I'll be interested to see what the rest of this looks like on September 13th. So if you are a fan of the original Uglies series and have thoughts about this trailer, let me know. If you are a fan of dystopias and maybe new to this particular series and have thoughts about what this trailer looks like, let me know. If you have no skin in the game but just want to give your opinion, let me know below. But as always, I really appreciate you hanging out and listening to my opinion. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good, maybe these original books or the original series. And if you can find the original covers, more power to you. Though I am not inherently against repackaging books. I think especially in young adult, it's really important to kind of recontextualize it for a new generation and speak to what is going to appeal to them. So I'm not precious about my covers. I just wish I had been able to find used copies of the originals at a reasonable price in a reasonable time frame, for nostalgia and sentimentality reasons. However, because I'm not as emotionally attached to this one, we'll be able to kind of annotate it a little bit more so that we can look at the book in relation to the show a little more actively. So hold tight for that if that's of interest. And if not, hey, you're still here, but I've already done my spiel. So yeah, bye.